Hello. Good evening and welcome to Town Hall. Thanks for coming out. Yeah, welcome to Town Hall. My name's Jessica Ballin, and I'm the Community Engagement and Outreach Manager here at Town Hall. And on behalf of the staff here, as well as our friends from Elliott Bay Books, it's my pleasure to welcome you to our presentation with Virginia Soul-Smith and Angela Garbes. Virginia's book, Fat Talk, Parenting in the Age of Diet Culture, is the subject of tonight's talk. As we get underway, I would like to acknowledge our institution stands on the unceded traditional territory of the Coast Salish people, particularly the Duwamish. We thank them for the continuing use of the natural resources of their ancestral homeland. We're grateful to have you join us tonight as part of our 25th anniversary season. Our presentation will run for about 60 minutes, including the Q&A. And when it comes time for the Q&A, we encourage you to ask your questions live at the mic. You can just line up right here and speak into the mic. There'll also be a QR code on the screen, so you can submit questions digitally if that's more comfortable for you. But it's always fun to hear your voices. And if you can, keep your questions concise and in the form of a question. That always helps. Town Hall's calendar is dynamic, and we add new events all the time. This coming Thursday, the first night of Hanukkah, celebrate at Town Hall with Grammy Award-winning klezmer band, the Klezmatics, and come early for a lobby full of festivities, including food vendor Zilberstein's. You can visit our website to learn more about events like these and join our email list. Town Hall's work is made possible through your support and the support of our sponsors. As part of our Arts and Culture series, this event is supported by For Culture, Arts Fund, and the City of Seattle's Office of Arts and Culture. Town Hall is also a member-supported organization. Thank you so much to the members who are here tonight. And if you share Town Hall's vision of a community strengthened by discourse and access to fresh ideas, please consider supporting us by donating or becoming a member. And lastly, if you don't already have your copy of Fat Talk, you can pick it up at the Elliott Bay Books table in the lobby, where you can also get it signed. Virginia Soul-Smith is a freelance journalist whose work has appeared in the New York Times Magazine, Harper's Magazine, Slate, and Elle. She is the author of The Eating Instinct, Food Culture, Body Image, and Guilt in America, and also writes the Burnt Toast newsletter and records the Burnt Toast podcast. She lives in New York's Hudson Valley with her 2 daughters, a dog, and way too many houseplants. Angela Garbes is the author of Essential Labor, Mothering as Social Change, called a landmark and a lightning storm by The New Yorker. Essential Labor was named a Best Book of 2022 by both The New Yorker and NPR. Her first book, Like a Mother, was also an NPR Best Book of the Year. Her writing has appeared in The Atlantic, The New York Times, New York Magazine, and was featured on The Daily Show with Trevor Noah and Fresh Air with Terry Gross. A first-generation Filipina-American, Garbes lives with her family in Beacon Hill. Please join me in welcoming Virginia Soul-Smith and Angela Garbes.
Hello.
Hello.
We have to get used to the microphones, okay.
Yeah. Thank you all for being here with us on this Sunday evening. You could be anywhere in the world, but you're here with us, and we appreciate that.
We really do. All right, so as you guys know, this is a podcast recording as well as a book event, so you're going to hear us do the podcast stuff, too.
Yeah.
So here we go. You're listening to the first ever live recording of Burnt Toast. This is the podcast about anti-fat bias, diet culture, parenting, and health. I'm Virginia Soul-Smith.
And I'm Angela Garbes. That's right, we're here in Seattle, Washington, live at Town Hall.
Now you know why Angela is the co-host tonight. And hype woman. So yeah, Angela is here because we are in Seattle. Thank you, Town Hall. Thank you all for coming out. And yeah, let's do this.
Yeah,
let's make a podcast.
So as you can see, we are, for those who are listening, there's a large projection of Virginia's book, Fat Talk, here. So we're here to talk about Virginia's book, Fat Talk, Parenting in the Age of Diet Culture. But we're also going to talk about bodies, and we're going to talk about big life transitions. But we'll put a little pin in that for the moment. I would just like to talk about, I mean, I would think maybe it was around this time. What is time at this point? But I had the pleasure of reading Fat Talk before it came out. And I remember being so blown away by it, and I think in the blurb I wrote, like, Virginia Saul-Smith is a visionary. But it's true, because Virginia took so many disparate things that I understood about American culture and about bodies and about diet culture and put it all together. And one of the things that I was just saying to her, we had dinner beforehand, we were talking about the male gaze. Boo, you can boo for things like that.
It might come up a few times.
But I was like, oh, when we talk about the male gaze, we're talking about American culture in many ways. We're talking about diet culture, and what Virginia helped me see, what she threaded together beautifully through research and reportage, is that, you know, American culture is diet culture, is white supremacist culture, is anti-fat culture, is all of these things. Like, when we talk about one, they're inextricably linked. And no matter how much we would like sometimes to separate them out, and the powers that be would like us to separate them out or not talk about them at all, they're so deeply linked. And she presented it in such a way that I was like, well, there's no turning back now, right? Like, I see it differently. And the other thing that I love about this book is it's about parenting, and I'm the mother of children, but I desperately needed this book for myself, right? There was so much that we as the grown-ups have to unlearn. There's a lot of parenting and reparenting that we have to do for ourselves around diet culture and anti-fat bias. And so Virginia's work has been very meaningful to me. I was so honored that she asked me to read it. I was so honored when Virginia bloomed my book, which I asked her after. I think we had a cute meeting story, actually. We met in our Instagram DMs. Because
I think I slipped into your DMs, or did you slip into mine?
You slipped into mine.
Yeah, that sounds
but
right.
I had posted a picture when I was working on Essential Labor, The Eating Instinct, which is Virginia's first book, which nobody should sleep on. Yes, shout out for Eating Instinct, real ones know. It was a huge part of my research process and informed several chapters of my book, but I had posted, you know, like a behind-the-scenes process shot. And one of Virginia's friends had sent it to her.
That's right, and was like, Angela Garbes read your book. And it was a really big deal, because Angela is a really big deal. So, yeah.
So then it was like a real meet cute. We were like, no, I'm a huge fan. No, I'm a huge fan. But now we get to be on stage. That was part of our, like,
mutually fangirl.
Yeah, becoming friends.
Yeah.
Okay, so I would like to ask you, we are going to talk about BLT, big life transitions.
Big life transitions.
I just coined that right now. But one of the hugest transitions, and I know this as a writer, is when you transition from being in intense research and writing mode, which is private. I mean, you have a podcast and a newsletter, but it's very intense, private work. Like, sometimes I feel like until the book is out, I'm just sitting on my ass. Like, that's all I've been doing.
Absolutely.
Just thinking and having thoughts. And what is it like to have published a book that was an instant New York Times bestseller, right? Which is, you know, like, that's not, we don't live for all outward measures of success, but that's a pretty big one, right? And no writer, any writer who tells you it's not a big deal is lying.
Is lying through their teeth, yeah.
So it's an intense time of having that come out. I'd love to know, like, what does it feel like to have been, like, living with this book out in public, to have it be a transformative book for your career? And yeah, what's the transition of book promotion been like?
Well, some really good advice you gave me back in the spring was like, you won't really know how to answer that question for like 3 years. So I don't totally know. But it's been a really surreal year for a lot of reasons, a really amazing year. But yeah, it was going from being very private with this conversation to being very public with this conversation, which of course was the goal of having the conversation for other people
publishing
to come
a book.
to the conversation. But what I was saying to you before is, like, obviously while researching the book, I was pretty sure anti-fat bias was a thing. But then publishing a book about anti-fat bias and going out to talk about it as a fat person, it really confirmed for me that anti-fat bias is alive and well. Mostly in the men who email and send me DMs and have comments. And so that was, I was prepared for it. I think it's...
Yeah, I mean, I think anyone who writes about fatness
Yes.
and
And is a
maybe
woman.
not being mean to people who are fat,
Yeah.
not treating them like they're less than, is familiar with,
Yes.
you expect a certain amount of feedback.
You do.
And
You do.
trolling, I guess we would
Yes.
say. Yeah.
Yeah, no, absolutely. But it gave me, I think you're still somehow surprised by how personal it can feel at times, which isn't to say it's necessarily upsetting. Like Steve on the internet telling me that he doesn't find me attractive is not something that's keeping me up at night. Like, it's okay. Like the DMs that are like, men don't like fat chicks. I didn't actually write this book for them. It's okay. Not looking for that. But it gave me a sense, although I do identify as a fat person and have lived the last decade or so in a fat body, I was a skinny kid and a thin younger adult through intensive dieting efforts, not through any genetics or biology. But so I grew up with a lot of thin privilege, which is a concept I talk about in the book, which is basically the experience of the world being built for your body. You fit into the seats on airplanes. You fit into, chairs here are supporting your body. You're not worried when you go to an event like this, will the chair hold me? And I'm still what's called small fat, which is on the lower end of the plus size spectrum. So there's a lot of ways that being fat doesn't negatively impact my daily life because I'm not experiencing the constant impression that folks in bigger bodies are experiencing. But going out as a public fat person kind of inches you a little more over into that. So it just gave me a real, again, firsthand appreciation of this is what we're asking people to do all the time without making them New York Times bestsellers, just because they are bodies in the world, just because they live in fat bodies. They are going into doctors' offices, unable to access health care. They're, being turned away and told to lose weight before they're given fertility treatments or other basic medical care. They're earning less at jobs. And for our kids in schools, they're experiencing bullying and discrimination on a daily basis. So, yeah, it really just kind of drove all that home. Mm-hmm. Thanks to Steve on the internet.
Yeah, thanks, Steve. Will you share the story about, obviously you did a lot of interviews, including Fresh Air with Tanya Mosley.
Yes.
But you told me that, I don't know if this was, I'm assuming it was local news.
Oh, no, it was Chicago Morning News.
Okay,
we can just name them. Yes. An interview I did was a live TV interview for the book, and the thin white male news anchor audibly sighed. So are you saying obesity isn't a real problem? He was so upset to have me there.
I know, there's so many, people really don't want to hear this stuff.
No.
Right?
Yeah.
And I was thinking that trolling like that, especially when you have a book that makes the New York Times bestseller list, the week that it comes out, clearly people want to have this conversation, right? And I think about it, I don't want to I don't think it's that much of a stretch. I think of it as that trolling that comes out where it's easy to do it anonymously, right, on the internet. It feels like this last gasp in the way that Trumpism, right, is it's a numbers game, right? The average size of females in America is a 16 or an 18, right? There is this idea of the standard of beauty, which is thinness, which is whiteness, we're coming for you, right?
Yeah, we're coming
that
for
was a
you.
construct,
Yeah.
and it's falling away.
Yeah,
And it feels
60-something% of Americans, again, in the book I unpack everything that's wrong with the BMI, but 60% of Americans have an overweight or obese BMI. So yeah, in terms of bias, this is everyone. This is not a tiny marginalized group of people who, even if it was tiny, wouldn't deserve the treatment they get, of course,
right.
But this is everyone.
No, it's not. This is the majority of the population.
Yes. We can't pretend it doesn't exist.
Yeah.
This is, humans and bodies.
Okay, so we spent some time on Steve on the internet, but I would love to hear it's by and large the reception and the process of being out in the world with this book is, I'm hoping, has been positive.
Yes.
So I wondered if you could just share a little bit about that.
Yeah, I mean, to be clear, that has been the overwhelming experience is, oh God, I mean, I'll get teary just thinking about the emails I've gotten from parents saying this helps me think about how to keep my kids safe in the body that they have, how to advocate for them at the pediatrician's office. The emails from grown-up, like you said, it is it's marketed as a parenting book, but people saying, I don't have kids, but this is helping me like understand stuff that I experienced in my own childhood and, understand that, one person said to me, like, for so long, I understood my body as a problem, that it was my job and my responsibility to make myself fit in, as opposed to understanding, like, no, this is a whole system that wasn't built for my body, and that's a systemic problem. And so I'm hoping that it's helping people start to make that shift. Even more exciting, too, is hearing from doctors.
Oh, yeah.
Hearing from, medical researchers saying, like, yes, you're right, we have not been paying attention to the impact of anti-fat bias on people's health. We have not, when we are studying diets, we are never controlling for the fact that, when we're documenting health benefits from weight loss, we're never documenting the fact that if you lose some degree of weight, you will experience less anti-fatness, and that might be some of the reasons that your health appears, quote unquote, better.
Right.
Because the world is now treating you, because suddenly you're able to access the healthcare you weren't able to access before. It's opening doors. And maybe that's the problem. Maybe it's not, well, how do we make everyone thinner so that they can be treated better? Maybe we flip that a little bit.
Yeah, well, I think when you get to, that's really like a dream as writers who work in this sort of space of sort of service journalism, but also wanting to like, give voice to these things and be like, hey, this is going on, like this is important, this is significant, like that feeling of, sometimes I feel like I'm like, oh, I'm part of changing the cultural conversation, like it's so nebulous, like what is that, right? But when like hearing from someone like that, like that's an issue of like gatekeeping.
Yeah.
That's an issue of like, there is like, it's small, but it's significant, right? That idea of like change happening within those institutions is huge.
Yeah, if we can change the way weight and health gets studied to always make like any study on weight and health has to examine the presence of weight stigma and the impact on people's health, has to look at, when people go on diets and lose weight in the short term and you get excited because their biomarkers improve, what happens to them in 5 years when the weight's been regained, both in terms of physical health, but also in terms of things like disordered eating relationships and, increased rates of eating disorders.
Yeah.
And none of that is getting tracked most of the time because of all of this baked in bias that says, well, fat people must want to lose weight, that must make them healthier. And it's impossible
also,
for them.
I think if we just back it up, I'm thinking about when I wrote my first book, which was about pregnancy, right? And like, why don't we know anything about pregnancy? Why hasn't it been studied? And the idea that just having a fat body is like an aberration, right? Not just like a variance of a body or just having a different body, right? Like the idea, it wasn't until this, I'll never forget this. I learned this when writing Like a Mother, that it wasn't until 1993 that Congress passed a law saying that if you receive funding for clinical trials from like the federal government, which is most clinical trials and anything in a research-based institution, you have to include females and people of color. So like our very definition, not even of health and wellness, of like what a human being is, doesn't include most of us who are here. And so that, like, we're up against really nothing less than that. So it is really heartening to hear about change coming from that.
Most studies that are done on anorexia nervosa, or actually most eating disorders, use BMI cutoffs when they screen for applicants. So people with a BMI above 25, which is the cutoff for the, quote, normal range, don't get included in the study. So because they think that fat people don't get eating disorders. So then we have no research on the fact that actually that happens quite a lot. But it's because when fat people engage in disordered eating relationships, their doctors are likely to congratulate us, ask us to do it more, ask us to go further with it. And so, that bias right there is that's people's lives. We're talking about, one of the most deadly mental health conditions. Yeah.
All right.
On that cheery note.
Well, do you want to talk about like our own like big life transitions and how our bodies are doing amid that? Because it takes a little bit of what's hard and what's good and what is just showing up in our
what's just
vessels every day.
Yeah. Let's do it.
Do you want to ask me? Should I ask you? What's going on in your life, Virginia?
Well...
We have continued like throughout the year lots of text messages and DMs about big, like these changes that we've made in our life, which is that I'm coming up on 1 year of sobriety, which, thank you. Which I decided,
Amazing.
like, I made that change for a number of reasons. One being that I realized I was an alcoholic. But so that's big. So I'm like 11 months sober, and there's so many changes that show up in my body. And Virginia's big news, if you don't know. I'll let you say it.
Oh, I'm getting divorced, so that's a big change. Yeah, you can clap. That's right. You can clap that one too.
Yeah.
Thank you all for not just immediately going, oh. It's a hard thing, but a good thing. Yes.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
I'd love to ask you, like, where does the experience of separating and getting a divorce and being in the process of that, like, how does your body feel in that, and where do you see that showing up?
I mean, I've talked about this a little bit on the podcast already, but, there has been this real freedom in how I feel about my body now, and this is not, I'm not going to talk negatively about my ex-husband, who's a really good guy and a good dad, but, this isn't about that, but it's just about, like, suddenly my body's not in relationship to anyone else. I mean, it's also being out of the early years of motherhood where your body belongs to your children so intensely.
I mean, I think that's like a huge piece of it. I can never.
We don't talk enough about that.
Yeah. I mean, my youngest child is now 5, and I'm like, really like, fucking finally. Like, I feel like, and she and I are still very close.
Oh,
but
yeah.
it's different. It's just different. I'm not wiping anything anymore. Like,
My
there's a lot
God.
less contact with fluids and feeling
Yes.
like my body is like.
I'm allowed to pee with the door closed, which feels big, like this is like an established thing now that I'm not like, companies
So you
not
have
welcome.
that freedom from your children,
Yeah.
and then now there's this.
Yeah, there's just this added layer, which is really interesting. And, and it wasn't immediate. Like, I think at first, this was the male gaze thing we were talking about, is I was very aware of when I would be, like, alone in my house, when my kids would be at their dad's now, the first few weekends, felt like I was, like, watching myself. Like, I was, like, observing my body still. Because, like, maybe my brain was like, well, no one's watching you anymore, so I will. What, like, there's just... Someone should still be watching, right? Because this, especially for women, this is how we're conditioned to always assume our bodies will be somewhat objectified and self-objectify our bodies. Right. This is diet culture teaching us that, like, even when you're just existing in your home, just like watching
somehow
TV on the couch,
how you look still really matters.
Still matters. Like, some part of my brain had, like, really bought into that. So, despite the fact that it's been almost a decade since I was last actively dieting and trying to make myself smaller, like, it helped me identify that there's this way that I've still been feeling like I need to contain or control or, this aspect of my body. So that's been really interesting. I mean, the other piece that's interesting is if you get on divorce talk, which I don't recommend we all do, but if you're on TikTok and you start getting fed divorce content, you're going to come across the revenge body concept pretty fast. And
Tell us more. There was an audible like.
People had a big
audience.
feeling about that. So the revenge body is basically the idea that, like, as soon as you get divorced, you need to start losing weight and be as hot as possible so that you can, like, get your next man and also make your ex feel bad, I guess. And yeah, wow, I just want no part of that. I know that's not anything I'm interested in. And what's really insidious about the revenge body is that it's often the narrative is, I was so stressed out by my divorce that I started losing weight, and then it wasn't that great. And shouldn't I, like, ride that train all the way?
Shouldn't I ride that unhealthy train
Yes.
into the sunset?
Correct. Like, thank God I went through this trauma that caused me to lose weight, and now I can keep losing weight.
But isn't part of, correct me if I'm wrong, isn't part of getting a divorce so you can, like, worry less about what that person thinks of you?
I mean, one would hope. One would hope that would be, like, a big part of it. Yeah, and yeah. But it really strikes me as so interesting that we congratulate people for losing, like, when trauma equals weight loss, we consider that a good thing.
Right.
I've even had people say like, oh, when I got divorced, like the weight just fell off me. I was like so stressed out, I just couldn't eat. I can eat still. I'm doing great with eating. I'm really doing it multiple times a day, like lots of different food groups. It's going really well, and I'm really happy about that.
One might say it's helping you survive.
Yeah, and I'm
not just divorce, but life.
I'm just like, it's just this new layer of diet culture. I'm like, when did we decide that any situation that makes you not eat, that this is somehow the right way to respond to stress, that this is like a desired effect of stress, that it would like hone your body down in some so I want no part of it. I'm really happy I'm still eating. I understand that like there's a spectrum of experiences, right? Like I've had friends get divorced and say like this appetite loss is super scary and I don't know what's going on, and they don't want to be congratulated for that. But the fact that we then demonize, because what is the other thing we often hear about fat people, right? Is like, well, what trauma caused that body? And so why are we congratulating people for achieving revenge body, but demonizing people who respond to trauma?
I feel like maybe this is, I don't think, no. Well, so I'm feeling like I wonder, like, we should be asking thin people that. Like, what trauma caused this body, right? Like,
what is this about?
What racist oppressive system caused this?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And I think the bottom line is like, don't talk about people's bodies when they're going through big life stuff. Like maybe assume that they, and maybe just don't congratulate people's bodies ever. Like don't assume that weight loss is always good. Don't assume that weight gain is always bad. Like
I think that's something I think about a lot as I get older. Like I used to have this like fixed idea of what my body was. Pregnancy will really do a number on you with that, right?
Turns out nothing's
But
fixed.
now I'm always like, oh, like I have seen my friends go through our bodies change all the time for different reasons. And like now that I'm like in this nebulous perimenopausal zone, I feel like my body's changing in ways, and I was like, oh, it's always meant to do this.
It's constantly meant to do it.
And so the idea of tying anything, your body size, to like any sort of reflection of like how you are is flawed from the beginning, right?
Well, this is in the chapter on puberty in the book. I get into this because the narrative we give kids about puberty is really rooted in anti-fatness, because we basically say to kids, like, it's going to be awful. Your body's going to change. You're not going to know what's going on. Like, it's so bad. It's so scary. Periods, boobs, whatever. All of this is terrible and to be avoided. And we really, like, idealize a skinny child's body, which, first of all, like, not all kids are, like, there's lots of fat kids before puberty. Like, their bodies are great. And then we teach, like, I remember this as a former skinny kid, like being afraid of the puberty weight gain as being built up as this huge, scary thing. And what if instead we reframe that narrative right from the get-go with kids and said, bodies are changing forever. Right. You're going to go through a huge amount of change in the next few years. You're still going to be you. Some of it's going to be weird. Some of it's going to be great. Yeah. Your experience is your experience.
Like to young females and girls to be like, this is your body helping you take up space in the world.
Yes.
Right? Like, because that's the other fear is, right, you get too big, and I think that's like, I think that's tied to that. We're like, we don't want the girls to get too big and,
for sure.
And demand things.
And it's fatness, like it's fear of fatness. It's also fear of sexuality, like, girls becoming more easily sexualized and all of that, so there's just like a lot of layers there, but it really comes down to, instead of saying like, wow, there's something really messed up about our culture that a grown man would hit on like a fifth grader with boobs, instead of that, we're like, how do we get this fifth grader with boobs to look as much like a little child as possible? Instead of saying like some 10-year-olds have boobs, like that's a normal way to have a body. And so there's this, we make it the child's problem, which then sets girls up to feel like my whole life I'm just in this race to like control my body as much as possible, take up as little space as possible.
I was thinking about what you were saying about like hearing from a reader, and something that I don't know, I think I heard it or I had this thought like 6 or 7 years ago, and it's a thing that I come back to all the time, which is like a body and a person is never a problem. Like, I don't know. I feel like I needed to hear that like every day as a child, but I think about it now. It's like, no, there's other factors, right? Like, it's never just you. It's never inherently you. It's not a thing that you need to fix.
No. Yeah. And I think this is like the number one message I hope anyone who either is a parent or works with kids in any way takes away from the book is like, we want and that I hope any like kids who read the book at some point take away is that like we want kids to understand their body is never a problem to be solved. Your body is to be trusted, your body, and this is for kids in all body sizes. This isn't like Asterix, as long as you stay thin. And the problem is right now, so many of us, because of the culture we live in, the water we're all swimming in, we're always attaching an asterisk. We're putting these conditions on who's allowed to take up space, who's allowed to feel safe in their bodies, who's allowed to love their bodies. And that's the fundamental thing we need to change.
I want to go back to this idea, though, that you're like, your body is just for you.
Yeah, and taking up space. Yeah.
Are you, like, does that freedom feel like relief? Like, does it look like sweatpants? What does it look like? like on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah, for sure, sweatpants, it's just like it's a thing I didn't realize I was missing, you know? And so I don't even know exactly what it looks like yet, I think. But I am really enjoying the idea that it is just for me, that there is no external gaze on it. I mean, other than, well, all of you right now, I guess, but when I'm not on a stage, you know, and I'm enjoying, like, I was going to say invisible, but I don't mean like I want to be invisible, but like the sort of privilege of a little bit of invisibility, I guess, or something, you know? Like, I like being past a stage of life where, like, walking down the street, like, I feel pretty, you know, it's a nice thing about middle age that you're no longer constantly receiving feedback from people. That, like,
you're no longer even being perceived by lots of people.
Right.
So
the lack of perception is obviously rooted in ageism and terrible, but also sort of nice sometimes. Yeah. Should we talk about, we were going to talk about dinner stuff too.
Yeah, can we talk about my big life transition?
Oh gosh, yes, wait. Do that first.
I wanted to talk about my, well, so it's interesting because I'm going to start with the positive, but since I got sober, guys, my skin is really, it's really looking good.
It is really glowing.
I also just got back from vacation, so I have a tan.
She's like amazingly tan, and
But it is like, I look in the mirror and I'm like, whoa, like this is actually, I'm not putting like all this stuff into my system that is like manifesting in my face. Like it's less puffy, it's still very round, but it's not as puffy, it's not as pink, and like it makes me feel really good. And it's a totally vain, silly thing. And it's not being perceived by anyone but myself in the mirror every day. And it feels really good.
Giving you joy. It's awesome. Yeah.
But the thing that's interesting is like I didn't realize it until it didn't happen. Like I think like it's the like what you said, the water we swim in, like it hadn't occurred to me, I did not get sober to lose weight, but until I didn't miraculously lose like 30 pounds, I was like, oh, I thought I would lose weight.
Well, the trauma thing, right? Like we think like, oh, we go through these stressful things and we just won't be able to eat and we'll be so, you know, like.
Yeah, no, and actually it was the opposite. So I was like, oh, I'm not, weight isn't just falling off of my body. That's interesting. Also, it's kind of a cliche, but it is true that I don't know if it's to replace the sugar that used to be part of drinking. But I'm definitely like ice cream with hot fudge every night guy now.
Love it.
And I was like, well, maybe that's also part of why I'm not losing weight. But the idea that anything, like it's a change in my body, but the idea that sobriety I would be associating that with weight or thinking about it. Like, it was just really interesting to me the way I felt like it was like I was like playing myself. Yeah. Where I was like, oh, like some little part of me thought this was going to happen and was slightly disappointed that it didn't. I mean, I feel like I've dealt with it and there's so many more pluses.
Right.
You know, in my life, but
we like you being alive and all, but
What?
I said we like you being alive.
Yeah, thank you. I like myself being alive. I like self-compassion for myself and all these other things, other big bonuses. But yeah, like that's where I think about like everything about diet culture. And like, I think it's also, I know that sobriety is a huge investment in my health, mental and physical, and like this idea of wellness and how it's just like wellness automatically on some level is linked to thinness. And even I, who I'm like, I reject this frame. I reject all of that. Like, but it's like, oh, the call is coming from inside the house.
Coming from
like,
inside.
That's how, like, it's very humbling. It's that insidious.
I mean, I think we're taught to approach, I think of the way we're taught to approach weight in pregnancy, right? Like you're going to gain this weight, not too much weight, but some approved amount of weight during
Right.
pregnancy, and then you're going to lose it. Like, of course, and like, what do they, people say like breastfeed so the weight falls off, and like, which
Yeah.
is a total bullshit myth. Like, like all of these things, like, we are taught to only embrace change if it equals thinness. Like, we have there's just a lot of transitions in life that we think should automatically lead to thinness in this way. It is like this insidious narrative that keeps coming up over and over. And it's, I think, helpful just to notice and like not beat yourself up if you felt, like you were programmed to think that way.
Yeah, like I wanted this thing, and then I was like, oh, well, I could stop eating ice cream. Or
but
also
that
just
sounds
like
crazy.
Yeah, and I'm like, no, I actually just want to. I could spend my time thinking about this thing that I realized I wanted, or I could enjoy every good thing that's happened. Since then, you know?
Yeah.
And I think that's a lot of, I mean, it is sort of similar to like postpartum stuff where it's like there's pressure that I think comes mostly from the outside, or this idea to lose that weight, Like if it was me, I'd be like, just leave me alone to like, not gestate, but continue my like fourth trimester in this like crazy period of
Try to
time
get
where,
some sleep,
where my body is like directly tied to another person's. Like, just leave me alone. Let me have this body that's just for that. But instead, you start thinking about like external things.
And I feel like there's some fantasy too that like these changes will equal more time to work out, more time to like be healthy in these very wellness culture-y ways. Even though the reality, as anyone who's like gone through a big life transition, is like, this is not the greatest time to adopt like an aggressive new workout routine. Like your days are probably chaotic, and maybe you need more downtime and more rest. And so I think it relates to like how, I think it's tied into like hustle culture and productivity culture, that like somehow whatever changes we're going through only like get gold stars if you can also like prove them with your body.
Yeah, I mean, one thing, so I'm like people who know me know that like one of my lines is, I work really hard and I'm never trying to work harder, right? Like, I feel like I grew up in a very like, you have to like excel sort of household. And I'm like low-key lazy, I feel like, or I thought, like, compared to my family, I had a lot of shame around that. And now I'm like, no, I have a lot of output and I need time to recover and restore. And when I, like the first month of being sober, I was like, I am a baby who is feeling all these things that I have purposely been trying not to feel. And all I can do is cry and take naps like a baby.
Yeah, that
and
seems right.
I did that a lot. And one thing that I realized going forward is like part of my like healing and taking care of myself is like I'm resting and chilling out a lot more. And I'm lucky at this particular place in my career and time that I can do those things, but I have struggled with feeling guilty. Like I'm like, I should be doing more. But actually rest is really suiting me right now.
Super,
And I feel like a season of rest is coming for you.
I am available for a season of rest. I am clearing my schedule, just like rest can be. I mean, I think
you'll have a custody agreement where
Every
you'll have
other
some time by
weekend.
yourself. For resting.
and I think, well, that's been another interesting thing, like talking about those solo weekends and like the observing myself. I think I was applying I think I was still acting like, prior to the separation, I would get like a weekend all to myself, like once or twice a year, it'd be like this rare thing. And so you would do this, maybe not everybody does this, but I would do this thing of like, all the things I don't normally get time to do, I'm gonna cram them into this weekend, and I'm gonna like have lunch with a friend and like do some kind of shopping I can't do with kids around, and also clean out a bunch of closets and like organize half the house, and like I did spend my first couple solo weekends like organizing a lot of closets, and then I was like, what am I doing this? I mean, if you're a stress organizer, you get it. Like, there's something very cathartic about doing that. But then I was just like, oh wow, I'm really tired and I don't want to make plans. And I just
definitely not a stress organizer. And I'm like, why would you do that?
It's a strange. Next time I'm stressed, I'll come to your house. It's a weird compulsion, and it's often quite helpful. But then I would be like, my kids would get back, and I would be exhausted because I did stuff all weekend. And I realized that, like, no, I just need to, I think, again, it was the self-objectification. I was like, I'll judge me if I just, like, lie on the couch and watch Good Girls on Netflix.
What trauma caused this stress organizing?
She's like, forget anti-fatness. We need to get to the bottom of this. Yeah, I don't really know. I mean, I was a joint custody kid with 2 bedrooms, so I think I did a lot of, like...
It was sort of a rhetorical question for, like, laughs, so you don't feel like you need
No,
to
we'll
answer
unpack
that.
it now. Let's do
Yeah,
it.
like, but if you want to go there, I'm here for you.
No, I was like, what did cause it? I'll book it for therapy next week. It's making a note. We'll get into it.
Yeah.
Anyway.
I think, do you want to talk a little bit about dinner before we go to audience questions?
Yeah, let's talk a little about dinner, because dinner is this thing that we have a lot of ideals and expectations around. And I think both of us have also been talking about how big life transitions can really fuck with your expectations of dinner and what you thought you needed to be doing about it.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I grew up in a household where both my parents worked full-time, but we had dinner together every night.
This is wild
And
to me.
I realized that I bring all of that to dinner every night and expecting, like, a 4-year-old and a 5-year-old to be like, like, you know what I mean? No.
I would love to sit at the table and discuss current events, yeah.
Yeah, no. Instead, they're like, I'm like, can't you just stay at the table? And my husband is like, literally, they can't.
Literally, they don't have the motor skills or coordination to stay at the table.
I'm also just going to say that if you want to submit a question, you guys have the QR code, so we're moving into that portion. So if you have questions, please submit them. Yes, but so one of the things that I've gotten from your work is this idea of, like, what is dinner about, right? Like, what is our real goal for dinner?
Yeah, I mean, it's diet culture.
Yeah.
That's the goal. So it's thinness. I mean, you know, there is all this research that families that eat dinner together regularly, kids do better in school and have, like, lower substance abuse issues, and, like, you know, there's all these benefits. But every media story you see about the importance of family dinner leads with less childhood obesity. Like, that's, like, the big headline always. So right there, you have, like, embedded into the premise that we are doing this to prevent fatness or correct fatness. And some really interesting research I looked at for the book compared the family dinner experiences of thin kids and fat kids. And they found that for thin kids, yeah, it really did, like, give them more chances to talk to their parents, and, like, their confidence was higher and their grades were better in school and all these things. But for fat kids, family dinner was a nightmare because it was like, are you sure you're gonna eat that? You already had enough pasta. How about you have the broccoli? No dessert tonight. Like, you know, it was this constant policing.
Or you can only have dessert if you eat XYZ.
Right.
Yeah.
You need 3 more bites of this, and then you can have, like,
Yeah.
one small cookie, you know? And so it was this constant policing and micromanaging of their bodies, of their understanding of themselves. Like, are you really still hungry?
Can
like,
you trust yourself?
Yeah. And so when I saw that study, I started thinking about, like, okay, so there's this embedded anti-fatness in the, you know, the privilege, like the sort of the way we've emphasized the importance of dinner, of family dinner. But there's also, I mean, there's a lot of classism, there's a lot of other privilege involved, like having the time to cook, having the budget.
It's also assuming a nuclear family,
Assuming
which is
a nuclear
not how
family.
most people live these days.
Yes.
Yeah.
I mean, so many different pieces of it started to seem really messed up. But particularly on the body piece, I think, like, if we want our kids to grow up being able to say no in situations where it's good to be able to say no. You know, I have 2 daughters. I'm thinking about teenage years and parties and dating and whatever. I want them to be able to say no. And if that means they get to say no to me at the dinner table about broccoli and that is respected, and so they know their no really matters, that is, like, really worth them not eating some broccoli.
Yeah.
You know?
I mean, related to that, my youngest has more of a sweet tooth than, like, anyone in the family, and she'll just be like, I love sugar.
Yeah, I love
and, you know,
her.
and we're all like, you know, like, my husband and I, and your work has helped me really, like, let's examine that. First of all, like, this idea, like, of a sugar high isn't real.
No, it's
you
not
know,
real.
usually
That's in the book, too.
she knows what we want her to have and what she doesn't. And so we've been practicing a lot less, like, just being much more hands off. And so when Halloween came, right, like, but here's what we've discovered. She can eat a lot of sugar.
Yeah, sure.
But she can regulate. Like, she had a bunch of candy earlier in the day on her sister's birthday. This was before Halloween, and then she had a big slice of cake and was eating it, and then she just stopped and looked at me and was like, that's enough for me. Really? Fascinating. Like, and so then I've been like watching this happen, and it happened with Halloween candy.
Yeah.
Where she had a few. She was mostly into trading the candy.
Yeah.
And then she was just sort of like, my husband eats more of the Halloween candy in our house than our children do. But that's like a thing. Like, the thing that I feared is much bigger than the thing itself.
Yes.
And I think, like, for me, relating especially to raising daughters, like, for her to be in tune with her body and to know what feels good and to say, I don't want that anymore.
Yes.
It's huge.
And to know like that they should listen to their bodies more than they should listen to what other people think about their bodies.
Yes.
And think that they know about their bodies. Like, we can't know someone else's hunger. We can't know, it's literally impossible for me to like look at Angela at dinner and be like, you are hungry for this much of your risotto. Like, how weird.
Yeah.
How weird if we did that to adults, right? And yet with kids, we somehow feel entitled to like weigh in and manage in that way. So
Yeah, I know. I was really feeling. I feel like I'm being like anti-kid here, right?
Yeah.
And I want them to feel. And your work has really helped me see that. And it just becomes so much more peaceful in our house around things like that.
Yeah.
You know, where it's like I don't have to be the parent that I don't want to be, which is the parent who's like, I don't know, right? I can just be like, cool, try and see what happens, and you can have what you want, and it's okay. You don't have to earn a treat.
Right. Not having to earn it. Yeah, I will say, if Fat Talk has no other legacy than kids getting to eat their Halloween candy, like I hear that a lot from people, like who are
Well, Lagaya thanks you.
I'm really here for that.
All right, so a couple of questions are rolling in, so please continue. Someone is asking, let's see here. When we talk about all of these intersecting oppressions, it's impossible to not see the roots of them all are capitalism.
Mm-hmm.
How can we fight to change the system of capitalism rather than just try and make it a kinder oppressive system? Just starting off with a softball.
Yeah, thank you for that very low stakes question. I feel no pressure whatsoever. I'm just going to solve capitalism now.
Yeah, I mean, that's a big one. That's a big one. I'm kind of like, but it's less like, I'm just going to be clear, Virginia and I don't know how to solve capitalism.
No, it's not really my expertise.
But I'm interested in this idea of like, I don't want to just make a kinder oppressive system. I think that I feel really implicated in that. Because I think that's something that a lot of us do. But, I mean, do you agree? Like, the root of this is...
Yeah, I mean, the root of this is a $60 billion industry that wants to sell you weight loss drugs and diet books and plans and all the rest of it. And so, you know, I am really wary of making this anyone's personal responsibility. Like, I don't think that's a really useful model for social change. I think we need systemic change. We need... As I talked about, the research models to be different. We need healthcare to be radically different. You know, all of that. So that because, you know, right now, basically, like, medical research is propping up the diet industry, is propping up healthcare, like, for-profit healthcare. Like, it's all intertwined. So we need, like, a big dismantling of all of this. But on a personal level, like, it does feel good not to, you know, one thing I do is like when I do want to exercise, like I don't give money to gyms anymore, which is not to say there are great fat positive gyms, but not where I live. So they do not get my money because I no longer want to have the experience of like tuning out the anti-fatness all around me in that kind of experience. And so I'd rather give it to, I do Lauren Lavelle's online workouts, shout out to Lauren, but you know, any like fat positive creator of color, someone doing awesome work, I'd rather support. So I think it can be liberating to realize like I don't have to keep paying for this in the ways that we are often unconsciously and deliberately paying for it. Yeah. But I also, like, the reason I'm really wary of saying like this is all on us to like make better consumer decisions is like one of the key ways anti-fatness plays out is by limiting the options of fat people when it comes to like clothing, for example, is a huge one. And so I am not going to demonize any fat person who's buying fast fashion because, you know, some companies that have really terrible workers' rights practices and are a part of the problem in all these other ways are some of the few brands making their size.
Right, or also fast fashion is what's affordable for people.
Right, it's affordable, it's like comes in your size and like this. So it's really complicated to say like, but like to whatever degree your privilege allows you making different choices, that's a good place to start.
I mean, I think, it's worth just repeating, there's like no ethical consumption in capitalism, right? Like,
That's right.
And I think that it's just really important, like we're all, until we can dismantle the entire system, we're all complicit and implicated in a certain way, right? And I think we can make better choices within that, but there's just it's not on us to bring down the whole thing. And I think making good choices where you can, making deliberate choices where you can, I think is really important. And I also think like just disengaging from consumption where you have to pay for things at all. I think that's like to go back to like one of the things that I'm big on is like community care and, meal sharing and like, hand-me-downs and all of these kinds of things. There are plenty of things that, libraries, public good, right? Like the commons, all of this stuff, like we're losing funding for that and we're losing it, but it's also because we've privatized all of those things and people are choosing to have private services of things rather than to use public good. And it's more inconvenient, like the times are weird and there's that kind of thing, but like there's plenty of ways to engage in this economy in ways that are not just, private spending for private companies. Wait, now you guys are going here. All right. Somehow they all came rolled in. All right, let me see here. Let's see. How could you, we're just going to do a few little like quick ones here.
Okay.
How would you discuss the health effects of ultra-processed foods with a child without relying on anti-fat tropes?
Okay, so the thing to understand about ultra-processed food, this is a hard one to do quickly. All right. If you want the deep dive on this, I did 2 whole podcast episodes on ultra-processed foods. You can find it in the Burnt Toast podcast archives. But the short version is to understand that a lot of the research on ultra-processed foods is really in its infancy. A lot of the reasons these foods get demonized is not because of their nutritional makeup. It's because these are the foods that we associate with poverty and with people of color and fatness. And so there is a lot of bias bound up in the fact that we are demonizing ultra-processed foods as unhealthy. If you are on a budget, if you are very time-pressed, if you need to eat something quickly and this is what's available to you, an ultra-processed food is a healthy choice. It is going to always be more healthy to feed yourself than to not feed yourself. It's always going to be healthier to, feed your child than to not feed your child. And we really need to keep this in mind, especially those of us who are white and privileged, when we start talking about the problems with ultra-processed foods, because they actually serve like a real good in the world. That's not the same thing as me thinking the corporations that make them are good. I don't, but this is it. So in terms of talking to kids, all foods are good foods. All foods play a role. There's no reason not to eat any particular food unless you have a life-threatening allergy to it. There's no need to demonize these foods. So I don't think it's something you actually need to overly discuss with kids. You can just say, like, it's not good for us to eat the same foods all day, every day. We'd get sick if we ate broccoli for every meal, just like we'd get sick if we ate Cheetos for every meal.
As you've been traveling and promoting Fat Talk, are there things that you've heard or that are helpful supports for fat parents raising fat kids? Any highlights to share?
Well, I think finding community is super important and helpful. And I think whether that's, ideally in-person community, but often, online community is really important. I'm not sure if this person is a fat parent or if they're trying to support a fat parent they know.
I don't know
We
either.
don't know this from Okay.
Just
Sorry.
looking for resources. And,
Well, the Burnt Toast newsletter is a really good resource. Sorry.
True. Conveniently also true. It's true, yes.
But yeah, finding community and finding, I think too, like, if you are, let's say, a straight-sized person trying to support someone, I think where fat parents often experience the most bias is when they go to the pediatrician's office, because pediatricians have high levels of anti-fat bias, and there's a lot of judgment if you have a fat kid and you're a fat parent. It's like a whole situation. So, looking like this sounds ridiculous, but like bringing a thin friend to the doctor's office helps a lot. Like my kid's dad is straight-sized. He's had a lot more success talking to the pediatrician about why we're not going to like get on them about only eating beige foods or whatever.
Right, yeah.
And so like, don't be afraid to bring in that privilege to back you up when you need it.
Yeah, I bring my husband to anything financial and anything like that involves like forms and stuff because
Yeah.
it just eases the tension. He's a really nice white guy, but it really helps. I like this question a lot. Any shifts in how you think about friendships? How has sobriety, fat positive lens, divorce impacted friendships?
Oh my God, friendships are the best. Tracy Clark Flory, who's a great writer, just wrote a piece on her newsletter about platonically dating your friends.
Yes. I think I talked about this when I was on
Yes.
your podcast. Yes. I had just come from a blissful weekend where I spent a lot of time in bed with a friend watching Love is Blind.
Yes,
It was wonderful.
Yes. And I think a big shift I've made as I'm, now not partnered is like understanding we have this hierarchy of relationships in our culture, and heterosexual romantic partnership is like the top of the pinnacle. And when you're doing that, you often end up leaving all these other relationships. Even if you're still invested in them, they're just like getting less of you.
Yeah.
And so I really love that my friends are getting more of me now, and that I'm getting more of my friends.
Yeah. And for me, what I found is that I love my friends and my people. My community is everything to me. I can grow my community. Like I have found like deep, meaningful friendships with people who I met in like Zoom rooms talking about sobriety, right? And there are people who like with this particular disease that I have, like that community of people, I'm just able to go there with them and talk to them, and it's been everything. Like I don't think that sobriety is something that I could have done alone. I know it. There's no way I could have done it. I could do it alone. No way I'm doing it alone. And I needed people beyond the people who knew me, just as much for myself, because I didn't have to feel ashamed or anything. I could talk to people who like understood exactly what I was going through. And, other friends, it's like, yeah, I could get it. It could be tiresome to talk about these things over and over. So yeah, like you can always make new friends and find new wonderful friendships.
Yeah. I love that. And I was just going to add, like, I think for fat folks, like, having other fat friends is crucial because I think there is, again, a shorthand and a just shared experience that, I have a lot of thin friends and they're great, but yeah.
Okay, this will be our last question before we move on into the sort of closing. And I'm sorry we couldn't get to all of the questions, but this one says, I have zero qualms about being the family member to interrupt racist, colonialist, sexist, classist, et al. Narratives. So why am I totally unable to talk with people I love, most notably my family, about the ways their anti-fatness harms not only me and my family, but them too?
Yeah. This is one of the most common questions I get asked. And, I don't believe in an oppression Olympics at all. Like, all of these issues are hard and complicated and nuanced in their own ways. But fat is the bias that I think, like, we don't have a lot of fat pride parades. Do you know what I mean? Like, we're still working on building fat pride. And we're still working, we're doing it, we're getting there. And there is, like, decades of fat activism that's laid this foundation. But this is one where we internalize it and we put it on ourselves in a way that I think it can be easier to call out racism and be clear that, like, this person is the bad guy for saying the racist thing. I am not bad. I'm not saying that's the universal experience. Obviously, I'm white and I don't experience it. But, like, I think it's just, as for someone naming it, you feel like I can name this thing that I can see as unequivocally bad. And when it comes to fatness, we're much quicker to be like, well, I feel uncomfortable like this, but it's probably my fault. And if I was thin, I wouldn't have to feel bad about this. Like, we're just much quicker to buy into the system in a way that we have to recognize that, like, we have to say fat. We have to say it a bunch of times to ourselves. We have to get really comfortable saying it. We have to do that reclaiming process and be able to, do it and name it in the same way you would name any other bias. And I think a helpful exercise is sometimes if you're hearing a fat joke or an anti-fat statement and you're like, should I call it out? Should I not call it out? Like, insert, like, what if they said black? What if they said gay? What if they said, and say to yourself, like, oh, I would like immediately name this, and then this is the same. Like recognize that you do the work here too.
Yeah. I think it is really, really hard to, like, that piece of the question that's like, how do you tell someone this is harming you too? Right? I think that's hard because people don't want to hear it.
No.
People don't want to believe it. And it's also, it's just such like a thing, it's a hard thing to say. Like, you are like, you're like lodging these things at, lobbing these things at me, but actually, like, what does it reflect about you? Like, that's a really hard thing to say to family, but I think, I don't necessarily have an answer, but I think that there's that way of like, what do we have in common and what do we lose? It goes back to that question, right, of like, what trauma caused your thinness, right? Like, maybe it's just your body type, or maybe it's years of like being controlled, or years of trying to please people, or I don't know, like thinking about the ways that which like our fates are tied together.
I mean, one thing I like to do, because often how this comes out, and the reason I think it is also hard to call out, is people are saying deprecating things about themselves, like, you know, I'm so fat, or I shouldn't eat the cookie, or whatever it is. And I think what can be helpful in that moment is, you know, we often want to rush in and say like, well, A, no, you're not fat, which is sort of problematic because now you've just...
I know, sometimes I'm like, no, I am a little, it's okay.
Yeah, it's great, it's great. And like, don't, you know, then you're reinforcing the idea that fatness is bad. But if you instead say something like, I really hate that our culture makes us feel like we have to apologize for eating. And like immediately shift the blame over to the system and to the larger issue. Now you have formed that allyship with them.
Yeah.
We are both experiencing this without you saying to them, like, you, Grandma, are experiencing anti-fatness. Like, she may not be ready for that. But you can say, like, I really hate the way society makes us feel so bad about our bodies all the time.
Yeah.
And now you've just, like, joined forces a little bit.
Yes.
Yeah.
All right. I think we're gonna start to wrap up here.
Yeah.
We've like, thank you, Seattle.
Wait, before that, we got to do
no.
butter first.
Well, a little bit of hooting and hollering, yeah.
All right, so we wrap up every Burnt Toast podcast with butter for your burnt toast, which is our recommendation segment. So even though this is a different type of episode than we normally do, Angela, what is your butter today?
Okay, so I was getting dressed to come here, and I was like, what of my cute outfits do I want to wear? And I obviously settled on a giant one-piece denim romper and this oversized blazer because I've been thinking for the last few weeks about this idea. Someone was like, oh, it's really flattering. And I was like, flattering? Like, what do we mean when we say flattering? Like, you should wear something that's flattering, like black is so flattering, or like a high waist is really flattering on you. Like, it means it's thin. It makes you look thinner. It means it's like flattening, right?
Literally
and so
flattening
I was
your
like,
body.
I don't think I like that as like what flattering is. Flattering should be like what makes something look its best, or like. And when I feel my best, I'm comfortable, and so I'm in my oversize era, and I've decided that like flattering can be oversized and drapey, and yeah, it's just about like my butter, I guess, is sort of like flipping that idea of what flattering is to being what do I think flattering is
What do you
for
want it
me
to be?
and what makes me feel my best.
I love it.
Yeah.
I love that we both wore oversized denim. We were having like a mind meld.
Yes.
We did not plan
We
our
didn't plan
outfits. I did specify comfortable shoes, which we did both do.
Yes.
But yeah,
I listened.
We did the oversized denim, which I love. Yeah, my butter is very related, which is packing for this trip, which is the last stop on the the Fat Talk book tour. I'm mixing up my things. The last stop on the Fat Talk book tour. For this event, as I packed my suitcase to come here, I packed no jeans, I packed no heels, and I packed no underwire bras. And this
That's big. That's big.
this feels really big for me. So yeah, we are recommending comfortable clothes that you take up space in.
Yeah,
Those are
flattering.
better. Yeah.
In what that means to you.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you all so much. This was an amazing conversation, Angela.
Thank you so much to Town Hall and to Seattle for being here with us.
I do have to, wait, sorry. I have to really quickly read the credits for the podcast episode, so just bear with me for a second. So yeah, thank you, Town Hall. Thank you all so much for listening to Burnt Toast. If you'd like to support the show, make sure to follow us for free in your podcast player. You can follow Angela Garbes on Substack at Don't Need a Reason.
Don't need a reason.
Don't Need a Reason. You can follow her on Instagram at Angela Garbes. You can subscribe to the Burnt Toast newsletter at virginiasoulsmith.substack, and I'm also on Instagram at _soulsmith. Our transcripts are edited and formatted by the wonderful Corinne Fay, who runs at Sell Trade Plus. Some Corinne fans in the audience, I like it. An Instagram account where you can buy and sell plus-size clothing. The Burnt Toast logo is by Deanna Lowe. Our theme music is by Jeff Bailey and Chris Maxwell. And Tommy Heron is our audio engineer. Thanks for listening and supporting independent, anti-diet journalism.